Hello and welcome to Astro Psych. In this episode, I will be discussing the book The Sociopath Next Door by Dr. Martha Stout. My name is Ned DeHaan and I am your host. This will be a book discussion, but it won't be a traditional book review. Instead, I'm just going to pull out some ideas from the book and respond to them, the things that truly caught my attention. My main channel on YouTube is called BlackBoxOnlineRadio, which mostly talks about true crime, and I've also been a guest on other programs such as Professor Dad, Planet X Filmworks, and the Sodcast, and this book was one that was recommended to me. But I really wanted to use it to enhance my understanding of serial killers and criminals. But I found that the most fascinating parts of the book pertain more toward relationships, or people who weren't hardened criminals, people who weren't serial killers, the way that the everyday individual thinks and the way that someone with sociopathic tendencies would think. And I think that it's arranged in a way that's truly trying to get to the heart of the issue, whereas some books about psychology get caught up in wheel spinning. And overall, I found the presentation to be very easy to follow in this one, The Sociopath Next Door by Dr. Martha Stout. And if you have ideas for future episodes of Astro Psych 400, you can put them in the comment section down below. You can also hit the like button and subscribe. It really helps out the channel. As far as this book goes, it really begs the question of, how does a sociopath think? How does a sociopath function? Because a lot of people just have this understanding that sociopaths are not capable of experiencing human empathy. They don't care about other people. And this book begins by just asking the question, well, why? Or maybe a better way of putting it is, why not? Why doesn't a sociopath have these types of emotional bonds with other people? It's just that the emotional bonds are not there. And the emotional bonds are not there because the conscience is not there. For a lot of people, the conscience is just a guiding force. It's not even second nature, it's first nature. They don't have to think about things of, I'm not going to steal something from one of my coworkers. I'm not going to abuse my children. They're just automatically going to do things by respecting other people's property, by respecting human life. But if someone is truly a sociopath, then they don't have these types of emotional bonds to other people or even to other living creatures such as animals. So therefore, they do not feel anything for them. Thus, they ultimately end up not having a conscience. The conscience is very, very big and very, very important to this presentation. Now, when I've been talking about true crime cases in the past, I frequently quote the therapist Susan Forward, who appears on television from time to time. And she once said that the average person has a conscience that's like Swiss cheese. Normally, it's very solid, but there can be gaping holes in their conscience where, okay, maybe they aren't going to steal things most of the time, but sometimes they would. Maybe they wouldn't normally hurt someone, but sometimes they would. And maybe they would even do something more extreme, such as murder someone. In these gaping holes in their conscience, I use this term all the time, Swiss cheese conscience from Susan Forward. And a question that is explored in the book by Dr. Martha Stout is, why? Why do people have these types of experiences where they are normally very solid with their moral and ethical thinking, but then they have these gaps? And the answer is, when temptation is excessive, those holes in the conscience can form. And I think that is a very good way of encapsulating it, when temptation is excessive. And I've really found that a lot of the discussions in this book are dealing with people who are not sociopathic serial killers, but rather sociopaths who end up functioning in different ways. There's the story of a businessman who just really tries to excel at his career, and when he was little, he would abuse animals, particularly frogs, and his parents even said, well, we have to hide the cat because they didn't want him to hurt the cat. And that's an immediate warning flag, but he didn't grow up to be a serial killer. Instead, he grew up to be the CEO of a corporation, a very ruthless and powerful businessman, but at the same time, he's not a serial killer to the best of our knowledge. And this stuff gets explored by a different psychologist named Dr. Romani, who appears on YouTube. She has her own channel, and she said that one of the reasons why sociopaths succeed in the business world and even the political world is they don't have to have emotional backlash related to their decisions. For example, Somebody can say, all right, I'm going to close a factory and 5,000 people are going to lose their jobs and we're going to outsource to India or China or somewhere. And they just do it. They just make the decisions and they don't feel anything for the employees who lost their jobs. The politician is going to say, okay, I'm going to start a war during the election year because people are going to be more likely to vote for me if there's an ongoing war for their own political strategic reasons. That's just their plan. That's just their mindset. That's what they want to do. That's what they've chosen to do. And those are bad things. I mean, they're just talking about putting thousands of people out of business. They're talking about making decisions that would lead to the deaths of tens of thousands of people, but they're doing it anyway because of their own self-serving agenda, because of their own power. And I asked somebody about that exact video that I was watching, just a challenge question that I brought up. I mean, you can't really call it a challenge question if you're just talking about this during a family gathering. It was actually at Thanksgiving one year, and I was discussing that exact statement from Dr. Ramani, and I said, do you think our society rewards sociopathic culture and tendencies? And the response I got from my family member was, no. The stuff that she's talking about, such as the businessman who wants to close the factory and put 5,000 people out of work, the politician who wants to start the war during the election year, those things definitely happen. But the business person who can keep the factory open and still generate a profit for the company is viewed as a better leader than one who has to close it, put 5,000 people out of work, and outsource the jobs. The politician who can get reelected without starting the war unnecessarily to maintain the power balance is viewed as a better leader. So our society doesn't immediately reward these types of sociopathic tendencies. But there is a section in the book, The Sociopath Next Door by Dr. Martha Stout, where it brings up something that I had the opportunity to discuss on a different YouTube channel. I'm just responding in the comment sections because I watch a lot of videos about psychology, and I was over on the channel Oak Leaves and Onions. That's one that I talk about a lot. And in the most popular video on that channel, there was this discussion of how the host of that program is a woman, and she said that she met a guy in a bar once, and she thought that he was a sociopathic serial killer, but she liked him. I think the exact term was, he seemed like a sociopathic serial killer, but she liked him. And my response was, you thought he was a sociopathic serial killer, but you liked him? What are you talking about? And her simple response was, think of it as a fascination that people would have with large predatory cats. And I think that she's read the book, The Sociopath Next Door, because that exact subject is discussed in the book. I mean, like about how people might have this infatuation with someone who has sociopathic tendencies, the way that they would have an infatuation with large predatory cats, the way that they would think lions and tigers are really cool. And at first, like, when I was responding to that person on the Oak Leaves and Onions channel, I was just thinking, yeah, you met a guy in a bar, you thought he was a sociopathic serial killer, but you liked him? What are you talking about? Okay, why don't you just get to the heart of the issue? Why don't you just say you thought he was hot? Why don't you just say you were attracted to him? Just why beat around the bush in this way with talking about lions and tigers and how people think that they're just so amazing? Well, the reason why is because Dr. Martha Stout lays out the entire case in the book, The Sociopath Next Door. What an idea. You actually have to read the book to get the full message. And what she says is that sometimes people can be attracted to someone not purely because of their physical appearance, but also because of capabilities, independence, power, their ability to be in control, strength. Those types of factors all get pulled in, or just something or someone can be very strong, very domineering, but not immediately threatening to you. So, I mean, as we said, lions, tigers, predatory cats might also fall in that nature. You look at one at the zoo and you think, wow, that's an impressive, majestic animal. Maybe she's experiencing something similar to that, where she thought that he was a strong, powerful man. And it goes beyond physical appearances. It's also about stature. It's also about demeanor. It's also about certain presence. But I strongly suspect that there is an element of physical attraction, an element of superficial attraction that she would also be experiencing when she was talking to that guy. And it sounds like she was talking to a Ted Bundy type, to be honest. He seemed like a sociopathic serial killer, but she still liked him. Now, here's something very big. We're talking about human behavior, and that is discussed in The Sociopath Next Door. How do you differentiate between a sociopath and just someone who is really mean? Because I really noticed that in the media, when people are talking about sociopaths, they just refer to anyone who could be labeled as a jerk and they call them a sociopath. Anyone who is just conventionally mean or unlikable, they get called a sociopath. And I was like, this is really going overboard. I mean, I am fully aware that there's something called the hair checklist out there, which is a 20-item checklist. And I've done it before on Black Box Online Radio. And at the time, when I did that recording, it was a 20-item checklist, and the maximum score was 40. And if somebody scored 30 out of 40 on the hair checklist, then they were deemed to be a sociopath. The problem was, though, psychology is constantly updating. Thomas Sachs even talks about this in The Myth of Mental Illness, where these terms that we are using are constantly evolving, and I think they have added more points and questions to the hair checklist. It's now like 22 questions or something like that. But the point is that it goes through a process of interpretation and evaluation. So how do you differentiate, though, between people in your day-to-day life that are sociopaths and would go on to be sociopathic serial killers versus people who would just simply be schoolyard bullies or the jerks at work, or just people that are unpleasant to be around? What are the differentiating factors between these two people, between serial killers and jerks? And there's a very clear list that is presented by Dr. Stout when she just says it is mostly about social status, drive, and bloodlust. And I really think that it would be more about drive and bloodlust as opposed to social status, because, I mean, people can behave in different ways, but just because somebody is of a certain social status, it doesn't necessarily completely connect to their ability to have a conscience or their ability to form emotional bonds. Instead, it's more about how there could be all different types of people and all different types of social statuses that could be sociopaths or have sociopathic tendencies. But that is definitely there, though. Drive and bloodlust. I mean, I think a lot of sociopathic serial killers live lives that are very low status, but they put on the mental gymnastics facade of thinking that they're superior to other people, but they are low status none the same, yet they are still sociopaths. Drive and bloodlust, though, would be absolutely more intense. But it's a good question to ask, because I'm sure you've encountered somebody in your life and where you just thought, well, they are absolutely indifferent to human life. They are just so mean at certain moments. They can be very calculating. Maybe they show a certain tendency and desire to be around certain people, but they don't actually seem to experience any type of empathy, compassion, or emotion that is outside of just their own benefits and desires. Someone is giving them what they want, so they are around them. And when they're not getting what they want from someone, they cut them out of their lives. Is that person really a sociopath, or is that person just a jerk? And the important thing to remember from this book, like the thing you take away, is drive, bloodlust, and social status. Social status can be somewhat connected to this issue that we're discussing, but I don't necessarily know if it would fit into sociopathy, because I once did an episode on Black Box Online Radio called Fruit Psychology. It seemed like a good idea at the time, trust me, and I was using like these different names, the names of different fruits, as ways to label human behavior. And there was one personality that I called the red berry, and the red berry is someone who only cares about people who are above them on the dominance hierarchy. If someone is below them on the dominance hierarchy, they are indifferent to them, or they're just a means to an end. They're just using other people who are below them on the dominance hierarchy to satisfy certain needs and desires, but they don't care at all about their well-being. In fact, if there's any type of conflict, or if the person isn't acting like they are on the same level or below them on the dominance hierarchy, then they will be extremely defensive, they'll be extremely confrontational, and you can even see this play out in like the workplace. Ever since I did that episode on Black Box Online Radio, I was noticing that sometimes it won't be the boss who calls you out on something. It'll be a coworker who wants to be the next boss, someone who wants the promotion, they're the ones who are going to call you out on this. Again, not the person who's at the top of the hierarchy, the person who is somewhat in the middle. Maybe they think of themselves as a right-hand man, and they want to maintain that particular status, or they're the ones who feel threatened by other people trying to advance in whatever type of hierarchy it is. You could say fighting for a promotion, but somebody responded to my episode on Black Box Online Radio simply by saying that I know exactly what you're talking about. Sometimes when you have circles of friends, one person is just going to say, I'm not going to be number one. I'm not going to be the leader of the pack, so I'm just going to settle for number two. I'm just going to be the right-hand man to the leader of the pack. And then they're going to be the ones who are going to be very rude, very confrontational, and most importantly, indifferent to the other person's well-being, even if it's extremely devastating, even if it gets to physical violence. And they will think that it's all justified. They will think that it's all acceptable and necessary, and the other person is in the wrong for simply just trying to interact with them on the same level, or trying to interact with the boss on a different level, or like the leader of the pack on a different level. So they're going to resort to very, very heinous tactics to do so. Social status, drive, and bloodlust. Very important factors. Now, as I said, though, there are different things that are discussed in this book that are well outside of the true crime world, and one of them is the ick factor. And I'm not going to lie to you guys, I heard about this book, The Sociopath Next Door, on the Owen Cook free tour channel. Owen Cook is a motivational speaker, and he recommended that people who are listening to his video read the book, The Sociopath Next Door. And I did. And he was talking about the ick factor, where, have you ever been in a group of people, around a group of people, and just, you're trying to get along with them, but some way, somehow, it seems like your behavior is bothering them, even if you're trying to be polite and friendly and sociable, and you're trying to talk to them, and you're just trying to have casual conversations. It seems like people are bothered by what you're saying. That is called the ick factor. And sociopaths can become a master of this, because sociopaths are people who don't necessarily, or let's just say they don't experience these type of emotional bonds, conscience, and empathy with other people or for other people. So anytime somebody is trying to have a casual conversation, or someone is even showing happy emotions, sad emotions, things of that nature, emotions that are related to feelings, they view that as a form of weakness. They view that as something that can be manipulated and exploited, because that's what they're trying to do. They immediately jump into the form of playing mental chess with the person, or they want to look at how they can manipulate. And this is going to sound a little bit weird, but I remember back when I was a kid and I was playing games with my family members, and I had a little sister, and I remember we were playing a game once, and we're just talking, and you know how kids play imaginary games where there aren't anything, it's not like a board game or a video game. We're playing this imaginary game where we're acting out scenarios, and I was just thinking, if she says this, then I can say that. And then if she says this next thing, then I can say this next thing. And I'm just mapping out these sequences in my mind about what she is going to say and how I'm going to respond. And it's all about gaining an advantage or saying something that would unintentionally create a type of power dynamic. I didn't think about it for a second in that way. It's just, I just thought that I was acting out different scenarios, and okay, she's going to say this and then I'm going to say that, and you know, whatever type of imaginary character she's playing or role-playing character she's playing is going to have some type of unfortunate moment or response. But yes, I'm trying to gain the upper hand in a situation, or I'm trying to become somewhat dominant in the game, but I don't think everybody grows out of that. Yeah, that's childhood stuff. I was like 9 or 10 years old when we were doing that, and I don't think that everybody grows out of that, where I think that some people do this well into adulthood, where they're just, again, they're viewing it as mental chess, where they're thinking, all right, now if this person does this, then I can do that, and if this person does that, then I can go on to the next additional step. So I just really view that a lot of these descriptions of sociopaths and people who are just experiencing conventionally mean behavior and demonstrating conventionally mean behavior are being very, very analytical and they're showing indifference to the people that they're analyzing. It's all just, how can I gain the upper hand in all of these situations? And somebody like a sociopathic serial killer is going to view that as a way that for them to experience a very intense form of bloodlust, somebody who believes that their actions were justified. And I was reading a different book, and it's called Killing for Sport by Pat Brown, which is all about the psychology of serial killers. And I was talking about it recently on Black Box Online Radio, and she more or less said that the way that a sociopathic serial killer is not just thinking, oh, I'm going to play mental chess with somebody because I had a traumatic experience in my childhood. No, those words aren't processed. They're thinking, I'm going to teach this bitch a lesson. I'm going to teach this person a lesson. I'm going to teach this jerk a lesson. And that's the way that people act, where they're thinking, all right, now this person is expressing themselves in certain ways. This person is expressing emotions and feelings in a certain way. I'm going to use those as pieces on the chessboard to try and manipulate them, or just try to do something to overpower them. There are 3 reasons why people commit crimes, right? Money, sex, and power. I've been talking about this for the long time. The trinity of true crime deviance is what I call it. And what is the most important one of those? What is the most intense experience? Money, sex, or power? Power. Absolutely. People care more greatly about power than they do about money. People care more greatly about power than they do about sex. It's just, that appears to be the way that people go about things when you look at a lot of different true crime stories. Watch countless episodes of Forensic Files and 48 Hours, and you will see this stuff playing out because people are trying to commit murder to get the life insurance money, right? Or sometimes somebody will murder their business partner to gain a controlling interest in the business. Usually, there's also a power dynamic. They feel cheated by somebody in the past, and now they want to get revenge, and they want to prove that they were the more dominant entity, even if they have to use some type of deceptive method. Because Dr. Martha Stout talks about this all the time in the book The Sociopath Next Door, when she just simply says that sociopaths use deceitfulness. And it goes beyond sociopaths. People who are antisocial use deceitfulness and deception as part of their tactics. And sociopaths are extremely antisocial. Antisocial in the conventional sense, meaning against the social norm. It's just some of them are pretty good at hiding it. So I told you guys that the main reason why I wanted to read this book was I do a true crime channel. I run a true crime channel on YouTube, and I was hoping to incorporate some of the statements about sociopaths into the programming on Black Box Online Radio. And I came to a section in the book The Sociopath Next Door that tells the story of Doreen Littlefield. And I was like, well, okay, let's see what this is. And it turns out she is a psychologist, or she was a psychologist, that had sociopathic tendencies, or perhaps was a clinical sociopath herself. I think she's actually identified as a clinical sociopath in the book. And part of me was just thinking, well, I'm mostly reading this book because I want to learn more about serial killers and criminals. I was tempted to just glaze right over that one and move on to the next chapter, but I am so glad that I read those stories, because again, sometimes you have to read the book to get the full message, but I'm glad I didn't skip that stuff, because it was one of the best sections in the book, because it's talking about how this woman made up her resume, made up some fake qualifications to become a psychologist. And as a sociopath, she is someone who begins to manipulate her patients, tell them things that were not true, and just begins to spin webs of lies, deceitfulness and deception, manipulation, power tripping, mental chess, all of this stuff. By the way, I talk about this a lot on Black Box Online Radio. What is the reason why people do this? To fuel their own excitement. Why does a sociopath do this? Dr. James Fallon talks about this in the book The Psychopath Inside. Yes, the psychopath inside. When he says that there is an irregularity in the brain of a psychopath or sociopath, sociopathy being factor 2 psychopathy. So in the brain of a psychopath, you have an irregularity between the amygdala, which controls emotion, and the orbitofrontal cortex, which is part of the brain that's located right behind your eyes. The orbitofrontal cortex is more about desires. And in short, people are acting on their desires, but they don't feel emotions for the people that are affected by their actions, emotional bonds, the conscience. All of this stuff is tied together. That's why you have to read many different books about psychology, because these people are all sharing very good observations and they're putting everything out there, and you just have to read the whole thing. So that's more or less why people like Doreen Littlefield would be pretending to be a psychologist, manipulating their patients, making them think things that weren't true, just trying to deceive them in the first place, just getting off on that, enjoying the manipulations. It fuels her own excitement. And also, why do people have their excitement fueled? Dopamine. This is what Dr. Helen Fisher calls the anatomy of love. There are 4 governing components of brain chemistry. Her book is called The Anatomy of Love, and she discusses the 4 governing components of brain chemistry: dopamine, serotonin, testosterone, and estrogen. People who are dopamine-centered are ones who do things to fuel their own excitement. People who are serotonin-centered do things to fuel a collective excitement. So somebody is acting on their urges and desires to just simply experience intensity, some type of intense reward in the brain, neurologically speaking. Now, when we have people like Doreen Littlefield, she also does other things in the book that are described. Like, for example, she meets somebody who works at the same hospital that she does. As previously stated, she's pretending to be a psychologist. And she tells that person, "Oh, why aren't you here? Aren't you late for the seminar that they're doing on this thing that's related to your job?" And the person that she meets is saying, "Oh, I didn't know that there was a seminar today. I'm going home." So then that person decides not to go home, and they hurry to the conference hall or the lecture hall where she's expecting the seminar to be, and there's nobody there. It's just a made-up story. It's just telling lies to fuel her own excitement. And this is the reason why I wanted to talk to you guys about this segment and include it in the end, because it's about how a sociopath, or how somebody who was a conventional bully, would deal with this. And it's that when she's going to be confronted by that person who comes over to her and says, "Hey, you told me that there was something going on at the lecture hall. You told me there was a seminar that I needed to attend, but there was nothing there." What she said was, the sociopath is just going to look in to the soft eyes of the other person, make an angry stare, and that other person will walk away and back down. And this is the stuff that I've really found other people do. This relates to people well beyond sociopaths and sociopathy. This is talking about how other people interact with individuals, and they do it somewhat unconsciously, when some people devote their entire life to listening to tone of voice, tonality, to looking at people's facial expressions, looking at their eye movements, looking how people are letting down their emotional defenses, and that if they say certain things, people will not be a threat to them. That people enter these types of non-threatening states by looking at their eyes, by listening to the sound of their voice, by just waiting for the opportune moments. Maybe this is a big one, though, that I talked about in something that I had written. I made this composition once called "True Crime Teaches Us to Conquer Toxic People," and this is something that I really highlighted. When you express emotions without paying attention to the people around you, it is unfashionable. That's almost a statement that I would like everybody to remember if some way, somehow you're listening to this. When you express emotions without paying attention to the other people around you, it is unfashionable, because that's when people start to change their facial expressions around you. That's when they start to behave differently. That's when people start to just experience things in a different way. But the sociopath is going to be an absolute master of that. And that's what I think Dr. Helen Stout is going at. And she just alludes to that in the book when she's talking about the story of Doreen Littlefield, that more or less she knows how to look at this person who is very gentle and non-threatening. She doesn't have to say a single word. She just looks at her with an angry stare, and the other person backs down, and it's all planned from the beginning. Now, I don't think I finished the thought when I was discussing those observations from Owen Cook and the ick factor, when he's telling about how sometimes people are just going to be very uncomfortable around you. You're trying to be nice, and they're going to just be bothered. You're going to try and be friendly, and just somebody in the group has a problem. They just look a little bit uncomfortable or upset. Maybe they're even disgusted. Maybe they're even making an expression like they don't want you around when you're just trying to be nice and polite and fair and honest. And what he said, though, was an interesting thing, and I don't recall this exact line in the book, so he might be either pulling from a different source or making his own observation. But what he said was that the only way to bring the ick factor down to zero is to become the jerk yourself, to become the person who just doesn't like other people, to beat the sociopath at their own game, to beat the jerk at work at their own game, to beat the bully at their own game, is to just be the one who doesn't like other people, not trying to get along. And I will never accept that. I will never accept that you have to be the jerk. Now, you can do what other people talk about, such as being strong, making better life choices, finding people that you actually want to be around. If you have problems with your coworkers, look for a different job. If you're someone who excels in jobs that don't really deal with a lot of human interaction, I don't think there's anything wrong with a solitary job. There's this enormous misconception out there that people who work solitary jobs are going to be involved in certain types of bizarre behavior. That whole concept of lone wolfism leads to strange behavior. Of course lone wolfism leads to strange behavior. It's lone wolfism. Lone wolves are not part of the pack. They're not part of a group. It's strange by definition, but strange does not mean destructive. Another thing I would just like people to remember, strange does not mean destructive. Not immediately, anyway. So when we look at all of these things about how people are interacting in groups, and how some people just have a problem, you don't have to be friends with everybody. You're not going to be friends with everybody. And you can certainly have boundaries. And this is what all of this stuff is leading to. All these books about psychology are leading to, is that ultimately, if you don't have boundaries, people will eat you alive. You don't necessarily have to be meaner than they are. You don't have to be the jerk. If somebody has a problem with things that you're saying, well, you don't have to interact with them. Or you can set up situations in the future where you don't have to interact with certain people who are not of your choosing. It can be done. So I'm just not really giving into this whole thing about how the only way to get the ick factor down to zero is to be the jerk yourself. And that's not even the message that was shared by Owen Cook. He's mostly saying that no matter what, people are going to have a problem with you. And the only way to completely stop feeling anything about it is to be the jerk yourself. But sometimes, yeah, it's going to suck, but you can push through it if you actually have an objective that you're going to try and accomplish. And Dr. Jordan Peterson talks about this too when he says that if you get into a position of power, people are not going to like you. Some way, somehow, people are going to try and challenge you. They're going to want more power for themselves. They're not going to agree with every decision that you make. Something that you're going to do is going to bother them. So that's just part of life. And we live in a world of power, not a world of virtue. So I hope you enjoyed this book discussion on The Sociopath Next Door by Dr. Martha Stout. And I was pulling from a lot of different sources, and I wanted to put them all together. But thank you so much for listening to this. And again, if you have any ideas for future episodes of Astro Psych 400, put your ideas in the comment section down below. One more time, you can hit the like button and subscribe. And that's all for me now. I'll see you over on BlackBoxOnlineRadio. Until next time.